Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. It's Tuesday. We weren't here live show yesterday. So anyway, Professor Vincent Racaniello is coming up at the end of the show. We're going to talk about the latest with the vaccines and some new vaccines that are coming out. We're going to dispel some myths or some unknowns about if you get the vaccine, can you still spread it? All that type of stuff. We'll do that coming up a little later. First, when I say that wokeism kills, I'm not kidding. I'm not exaggerating. Wokeism is a perverted and twisted way of looking at the world. It doesn't deal with reality. And when you don't deal with reality, you're never going to consider the unintended consequences. And unintended consequences result in, at least, a misallocation of resources. At worst, people dying. And I have a story of that. There's a doctor in Houston. He's from Pakistan, which is an important part of this story. Unfortunately, we'll get back to that. But he's in Houston. And he was tapped to be in charge of the vaccine distribution for Harris County Public Health Department. That's Houston, Harris County. Great. His wife has a lung disease. So in the beginning of COVID, he lived in a hotel for a month while he worked at the local hospital, just to be sure that he never brought COVID home to his wife. So he takes this very seriously. So he wanted to be in charge of the distribution of the vaccine because he wanted his city to be safe so that his wife could be healthy and safe. So December 22nd, he joined in on a conference call from the state of Texas on protocol for vaccine distribution, right? Every state has these different categories. So category 1 is healthcare workers and people at nursing homes, and then category 2 is people over 65 with health conditions, and it goes all the way down, right? So they went over all the protocols and who gets the vaccines first and all that. Now, each batch of vials, or every vial, has 11 doses in it. So once the vial is punctured to give that first dose, you have 10 more to give. And you have 6 hours to do it. You with me? So you puncture the vial, and then you give your first vaccine to someone. You got 6 hours to finish off those other 10 before you got to throw the thing away. Okay. So it's the first night of vaccine distribution. 250 people show up to this location where they're giving out the vaccines. Great. The night's winding down. One more person comes in. And just the way it worked out, they had to puncture a new vial. So that means once they gave that person the vaccine, they had 6 hours to give 10 more doses. But it was the end of the night. So 10 more people weren't going to be coming in. It was already dark out, and that was it. Now this doctor refused to waste a single dose of this vaccine. So he's like, I got to give these to someone. So he asked all the people who were there. They either refused or they already got it. The paramedics, let's give it to the paramedics. They already left. There were 2 police officers who were there. One of them declined, the other already got it. Okay, so we're not. So then he starts calling colleagues whose parents were eligible. And for whatever reason, none of that worked out. They weren't available or whatever. So he's like, I can't throw these away. The clock is ticking, I can't throw these away. So he drove to his home in a neighboring county, and he called friends who had older relatives. So he found a woman in her 60s with heart issues, and a woman in her 70s with a bunch of other health issues as well. Great, perfect. Shot, 8 to go. They found another house with 4 eligible people inside the house. 4 eligible people, awesome. Gave them a shot, they had 4 to go now, right? He drove to a house with a woman in her late 70s. Didn't know her, late 70s, gave her the vaccine. Awesome. 3 more vaccines to go, clock's ticking. Word got out. So he's on the phone to all these people. 3 people said, we'll take the vaccine. I'll meet you at your house. He's out driving around to people, right? So he's like, great, meet me at my house, perfect. So he gets to his house, 2 of the people were there. There was an acquaintance of his who's in her 50s who works at the front desk of a health clinic. And there was a woman in her 40s whose kid is on a ventilator. So boom, shot, I got 1 left. That 3rd person who said, I'll meet you at your house, called him and said, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm running late. He said, all right, when are you going to be here? They said, I'll be there in 20 minutes. And he said, that's too late. We're out of time. We only got like 6 minutes left. You're not going to make it by the 6-hour time limit. I can't give it to you after the 6 hours. So he said, I'm sorry, you can't have it. So he had 1 left, and we're out of time. So he looked at his wife. He didn't intend on giving it to her, but he's like, if I don't give it to you right now, I got to throw this in the toilet. So he gave his wife the final dose with minutes to spare. Whew. Great work, doctor. That's awesome. Amazing job. Thank you for saving lives, doctor. You could have easily just thrown those in the garbage at the clinic, gone home, gone to bed, come up and did the whole thing next morning. But you didn't. You went the extra mile to save lives. Thank you. The next morning he wakes up, fills out the paperwork about who he vaccinated, the whole thing. And a couple days later, he got a phone call. And he was asked why he gave doses outside of the scheduled event on December 29th. And he said, oh, well, I was keeping with the guidelines on the types of people who are to get the vaccine. I didn't want to waste any, and told him the whole story. Fired. Fired right on the spot. New York Times, the officials maintain that he violated protocol, should have returned the remaining doses to the office or thrown them away. Now, why? Why? Why was this a problem? Check this out. This is New York Times. He also said that one of the officials startled him by questioning the lack of equity among those who he vaccinated. Are you suggesting that there were too many Indian names in that group? The doctor asked. Exactly, he was told. Too many Indian people. Not enough equity. 2 weeks go by, a bunch of reporters show up at his door. And that's when he found out that not only had he been fired, but he was charged with a crime. He was charged with the crime of stealing vaccines. The DA of Harris County, Kim Ogg, OGG, she issued a press release. Fired Harris County health doctor charged with stealing vial of COVID vaccine. They said he stole a vial. He abused his position to place his friends and family in front of people who had gone through the lawful process to be there. He said no one from the DA's office ever contacted him to get his side of the story. Amazing. It's a story of bureaucracy, obviously. It's a story of an overzealous, grandstanding, progressive DA. Her campaign slogan is Texas's most progressive DA, right? So it's her thing. And it's a story of wokeism. Right? You vaccinated too many of this type of person. What about these type of people? What about black people? What about Hispanics? What about people of color? They said to the Pakistani immigrant who vaccinated Indian people who are not considered people of color because Indians have the highest average income of all ethnicities in America. Forget about their personal situations. Forget about their health problems. Forget about their need for the vaccine. That doesn't matter. They're the wrong color. Not enough equity. Now, the story has a happy ending. This is the judge. He dismissed the case right away. He said the court emphatically rejects this attempted imposition of the criminal law on the professional decisions of a physician. So they shot it down right away. But the damage was done. He lost his job. His wife can't sleep. His kids are worried. He now volunteers at a nonprofit health clinic for uninsured people because he doesn't have a job anymore. And he says this will always follow him. He said, how can I take it back? So that's the story. The question is, who are these people? Who are these people that want this much control over everything? Who are they? What's this mindset? Who is it? What is this worldview? You know, Biden's thinking about requiring COVID tests before you get on any plane for a domestic flight. Who are these people? UC Berkeley told their students that they cannot leave their dorm rooms. They must stay in. This is just the other day. They have to, this isn't like last February. This is just the other day. They have to stay inside their dorm rooms. They can't even leave their dorms for solo outdoor exercise. If you do, you could be kicked out of school. Now, it's not just COVID, right? It's this type of controls over everything. This is from Friday's New York Times. Biden's team will put forward a recovery plan. It's like an infrastructure plan that includes some uncontroversial ideas fixing roads and bridges, but also contains elements that go beyond the comfort zone of many center-left economists. The sticking point is what's known as industrial policy, meaning large-scale efforts to build up particular industries or sectors. While this industrial policy is no means foreign to the United States, the caricature that comes to mind, even for many liberals, is Soviet-era central planning. That's the New York Times. So they're referring to Biden's infrastructure plan as Soviet-era central planning. Super. Also, if you've never understood why the Black Lives Matter, they got their 13 principles, their 13 pillars. One of them is to disturb, disrupt, destroy the nuclear family. Why? Why does Black Lives Matter want to disrupt the nuclear family? What's the root of that? Thomas Sowell, in Vision of the Anointed, he wrote this. He said, this is back in 1995, he said, the family is inherently an obstacle to schemes for central control of social processes. Therefore, the anointed, the elites, necessarily find themselves repeatedly on a collision course with the family. But the preservation of the family as an autonomous decision-making unit is incompatible with the third-party decision-making that is at the heart of the vision of the anointed. Friedrich Engels' first draft of the Communist Manifesto included a deliberate undermining of family bonds as part of the Marxian political agenda. Third-party decision-making on every aspect of your life. That's why they have to destroy the family, because you're in the way. Your family's in the way of them controlling your life. COVID is just a pretense for all this. There are people on the far left who love telling you what you can and cannot do, and will go so far as to arrest doctors for distributing the vaccine to the wrong colored people and ban you from engaging in solo outdoor exercise. Stop giving these people any more control over your life. It'll never be enough for them. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, have you followed the latest with Gina Carano, the latest of, cancel culture? I want to tell her story, but there's a bigger lesson here, as there always is. So Gina Carano, she's on Disney Plus's The Mandalorian. She's one of the main characters on that show. She's conservative, and she was the other day fired from the show completely and dropped by her talent agency as well. Lucasfilms wrote a statement and said her social media posts denigrated people based on their cultural and religious identities, and it's abhorrent and unacceptable. Wow, abhorrent. So it turns out there were 3 posts over time that culminated in the most recent one that ultimately was the straw, right? So what has she posted that's so abhorrent? Okay, so first we got this back in November, right? Okay, so she's like a COVID truth or something, right? So that's terrible. And then, this is great, she was characterized as falsely suggesting voter fraud. So I was like, okay, what does she say that falsely adjusted? And this is what she tweeted about this. She just said we need to have my voter ID and make sure, we don't have any problems in the future. That was her suggesting voter fraud occurred. But ultimately, she was fired for this one. She wrote, Jews were beaten in the streets, not by Nazi soldiers, but by their neighbors, even by children. Because history is edited, most people today don't realize that to get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, the government first made their own neighbors hate them simply for being Jews. How is that any different from hating someone for their political views? That was abhorrent. So her point seems to be twofold. The first one is that, she's, the one people are globbing onto, I should say, is that people are, the one people are globbing onto is that she is comparing Republicans to Jews, and they're saying that's anti-Semitic. Her bigger point, though, is that it's often not the government only, or the government first, that does bad things to people. It's often a cultural push first, and the government follows. And that's what she said, and she was fired for this, which proved her point. I bring this up because it's another example of cancel culture, certainly, but it's also a story And it's a story of double standards, as we'll share in a second. But it's also a story of how you can make up whatever movie you want in your head, which is one of the themes of this show. There's another actor on The Mandalorian, the main actor. And back in 2018, he posted this meme comparing Trump's kids in cages to Germany in 1944. Now, apparently that wasn't anti-Semitic. But what's fun about this picture, the one on the bottom, you guys throw it up one more time, please. The one on the bottom there, it says America 2018. The fun thing about this story is it wasn't. That picture was not from 2018 during Trump's presidency. It was from 2010. Also, it wasn't in America. It was in Palestine. And it wasn't kids in cages. As you can see from this picture, the original picture, it was kids in line at a soup kitchen. And there just happened to be this section there where there were bars, and it looked like the kids are behind the bars. Which is clear that they're behind the bars, because when you zoom out in the original picture, you can see doors on the side. But when you go back, if you guys go back to the meme, you can see that they zoomed in so that you can't see that it's not an actual cage. So the Mandalorian actor was wrong on all three counts. It wasn't 2018, it wasn't Trump, it wasn't America, it wasn't a cage. But other than that, he was spot on. And the relevant part here is not fired for making such anti-Semitic comments. Remember AOC and other Democrats, they used the word Holocaust to describe the things that Trump has done, especially at the border. They said Trump was running concentration camps at the border. By the way, we went from, obviously they were called kids in cages, and now the headline is, President Biden is building overflow centers for migrant children. No more kids in cages. Overflow centers for migrant children. That's one cancel culture story. The very quick of another one, the host of The Bachelor, right? So here's the quick of the story. One of the contestants back in college went to an antebellum themed college party. So like before the Civil War. And the girls wear, it's the big excuse to wear big hoop dresses, right? Apparently that's racist to have an antebellum party. So the host defended her and said, hey everyone, she's not a racist. And in doing that, he was minimizing racism. So now he was fired. He stepped down from his job for defending her and gave a groveling apology in the process. Now the left says there's no such thing as cancel culture. They say it's consequential culture. There's consequences to your actions. It's consequential culture. Keep that story in mind. We've talked about the San Francisco School District. They changed the names of 44 schools, right? George Washington, Paul Revere, Dianne Feinstein. They took Dianne Feinstein. Dianne Feinstein isn't far left enough for San Francisco. And the story is because she was mayor of San Francisco, and there was like some civic display at the city hall or something. And in the civic display, there were a bunch of flags, and there was a Confederate flag. And some protester took the Confederate flag down, and she had it replaced. And that's enough to get her canceled from the school's name. But Feinstein's people say, no, I didn't replace it. It was the Parks Department that replaced it. And Feinstein's like, I actually did ultimately replace it. All right, that doesn't, she's got to go. Dianne Feinstein has to go. Okay, so that's super woke, and that's the ultimate of cancel culture. But it's so bad, the New Yorker, of all places, pushed back on the San Francisco School Board. And they asked the president of the San Francisco School Board, what are your thoughts about Abraham Lincoln? What do you think about Abraham Lincoln? Again, his name was removed from one of the schools. So president of the San Francisco School Board, who my understanding is a 30-year-old woke woman. What do you think of Abraham Lincoln? Here's what she said. This is an actual quote. She said, I think that the killing of indigenous peoples and that record is something that's not acknowledged. I think Lincoln gets more praise than how can I say this? Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that Lincoln is not someone that I typically tend to admire or see as a hero because of these specific instances where he's contributed to the pain of the decimation of people. That's not something that I want to ignore. It's something that I'm learning about and that I know it's not often spoke about. What? That's who these people are. They can't even say a nice thing about Abraham stinkin' Lincoln. like, hey, say a nice thing about Abraham Lincoln. I don't know, freed the slaves? Might be a good place to start. Couldn't even do it. So I came across an Abraham Lincoln story the other day, so I figured I'd just share it here, why not? So there was the Slave Trade Act of 1794. This is just 5 years after George Washington was inaugurated. So this made it illegal to export slaves from the United States to a foreign country. And it was illegal to build, fit, equip, load, or in any way prepare a ship within US borders for the purpose of slave trading. So let's say there's a slave ship from wherever, Cuba, and it stops in America port in order to get some food and then goes out and goes back on the slave trade. No, you can't even do that. That was 1794. Then we had the Piracy Act of 1820. And it said that any US citizen who's on the crew of a foreign ship that is involved with the slave trade shall be judged a pirate and shall suffer death, okay? That's the death penalty for any American. It's 1820, 40 years before the Civil War, 42 years, 41 years. Any American who's on a slave ship, put to death. 1820, now that law wasn't enforced sufficiently. But then we got up to 1860, and we had a new sheriff in town. Abraham Lincoln became the president. There was this guy, Captain Gordon. He was a slave trader, and he was in the Congo with his ship. He crammed 900 Africans, half of them kids, into his ship. And the mission was to go to Cuba and sell them in Cuba. But on the way, he was captured by an American ship. It's called the African Squadron. There's the group of these ships whose job was to capture these slave ships out there, right? So he got captured, and he expected to get a slap on the wrist. But Lincoln was now the president. And New York City had a new Republican U.S. attorney who wanted to end the slave trade once and for all. So he goes to trial, again, thinking not much will come of it. Lincoln received thousands of letters begging to pardon him. And their main argument was this law has been on the books for 40 years and no one's ever been put to death for it. The man's lawyers visited the president in person and made their case. And the president, Lincoln, he took out this letter of reprieve that was already prepared. And he picked up a pen ready to sign it, and he listened to the lawyers make their case as to why he should be pardoned. So he listened intently. And then he said to the lawyers, "You do not know how hard it is to have a human being die when you know that a stroke of your pen may save him." And he threw the pen down. He didn't sign it. He later said this. He said, "I believe I am kindly enough in nature and can be moved to pity to pardon the perpetrator of almost the worst crime that the mind of man can conceive or that the arm of man can execute. But any man who can rob Africa of her children to sell them into interminable bondage, I will never pardon." He was sentenced to death. The judge said, "You are soon to be confronted with the terrible consequences of your crime." San Francisco School Board president can't find anything good about Abraham Lincoln. Nothing. Our dear leaders, our elites, they know nothing about our history. So to make up for that obvious lacking and insufficiency, they get outraged over an antebellum-themed college party to cover up for their ignorance. And then to pretend like they're doing something, they destroy people's lives. Makes them feel good. Don't drop your kids off at these buildings with these people. They don't have your kid's best interests at heart. Imagine your kid going to school and not learning anything about Abraham Lincoln, not learning the story I just shared or many, many other things, but instead having teachers and the curriculum there's nothing good about Abraham Lincoln. He killed indigenous people, that's it. Never cave to the woke mob. Coming up at the end of the show, in 2 segments, we'll talk with Professor Vincent Racaniello, latest with COVID and the vaccines and all the rest. Coming up next, we'll talk to Scott Hounsel about Freedom of Information Act requests that are being denied about the Capitol Police Department and where I think the real investigation needs to be regarding what happened on January 6th. We'll do that coming up next. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. Thankfully, this ridiculous trial is over now, and I think we should now have an investigation into what really needs to be investigated, and that is the lack of proper security on January 6th that enabled this to even happen in the first place. Scott Hounsel's with us. He is at Red State, the resident data and polling expert, redstate.com. What's going on, Scott?
How goes it, Mike? Thanks for having me again.
Hey, man. My pleasure. Tell me what a Freedom of Information Act is, a FOIA.
So it was a law passed several years ago that allows for the United States, the residents of the United States, to be able to request information or petition information from their government. So they're able to go in and say, hey, I have a question. Now, there's certain exemptions that exist in that. For instance, you can't FOIA something from the Supreme Court, the halls of Congress, et cetera. But for the most part, any federal agency that's defined under there is FOIA-able. You can go in and request the information from them.
So emails, documents from your congressman, stuff like that, that's public record, or is that right?
Not emails from your congressperson, but like emails within the executive branch, anything from the FBI, et cetera. Unless it's a matter of national security or an ongoing investigation, they must release it.
Okay, and again, the point of it is that we're paying you, like you work for us.
Transparency in government. The thing, that we should be having, but don't often.
So we're very grateful that there's people like you who make these FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests. So you tried to make some FOIA requests of whom the other day?
So I went after the U.S. Capitol Police originally, asking them for the security footage from inside both of the office buildings, which AOC stated that she was in. Originally she stated that she was in the Cannon building and then moved over to the Longworth building at the direction of the U.S. Capitol Police. The story that she told was obviously that there were rioters running through the hallways of the Capitol office building, and that they were threatening her and banging on the door and all sorts of horrible things that were going along. And unfortunately, the data just shows that the information that we have, the eyewitness accounts, said it didn't happen. So the question is, who's telling the truth? Is it the right-wing people that are trying to prove AOC wrong? Or is AOC lying to somehow inspire and incite violence against the right? And so long and short of it is that I decided to get to the bottom of it and simply FOIA request these security camera footage, or this security camera footage from those two office buildings on that day.
Beautiful. What'd they say?
They came back with, so I got an interesting email back from both the Inspector General and the PIO, the Public Information Officer, with the U.S. Capitol Police, stating that they are not a federal agency. The problem is, and as I covered over Red State, they define themselves on their own website as a federal agency, a federal law enforcement agency. The thing we know about the division of government and the separation of powers is that the Congress has the power to pass laws, and then the executive then goes on to enforce said laws. In this particular case, the U.S. Capitol Police is a law enforcement entity to just the legislative branch. And they're stating that they do not have any requirement under the Freedom of Information Act request to present that information, despite the fact, like I said, that they define themselves in their own website as a federal law enforcement agency. And again, going back, there's this very specific part of the law that states that an agency is anything that is under executes law, etc., but in addition can be in and out of another agency that is exempt from it. So in this particular case, Congress, yes, is exempt from it, but is really the U.S. Capitol Police exempt from it? So after thinking about it for a bit, I decided that the best course of action at that point was to move forward with FOIAing directly the Speaker's office. Because if anyone has the power to demand something from the U.S. Capitol Police, it would be the Speaker's office. And then I submitted that request just last, I believe, Thursday or Friday, and I haven't heard back anything as of yet. But I will definitely be following up with this. This is a very, if they can use the footage to go and try to dunk on Trump, why can't it be presented to the public to be able to know exactly what happened in the halls of Congress that day?
Wow, that's so good. Like if only there was a way to find out what was really happening, and it's there, it exists. Surely it exists. Surely there's footage that could prove AOC right and make their case even stronger.
Exactly my point. What I've always said was, and I put it in all my Freedom of Act requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, is I will publish the story no matter what the result is. If suddenly there's 50 people banging on AOC's door trying to get to AOC's office, I'll pub that. That's if there are people that are acting like that on the right wing, we need to know this. But again, if we go in, we know that the security footage exists. They used it during the trial. We know that they can release it because, again, they used it during the trial. So why can't we have, as the people, we the people, this is the people's house, why can't we the people have access to that security camera footage?
Yeah, superb, Scott. That's really good. Ever since AOC made those comments and everyone just ran with it without asking any questions, unlike you, my first thought was, is anyone going to talk to the officer that she's talking about? Like, is he ever going to speak? And I want to ask you, like, is he able to speak? Because AOC says he was mean and said these things and yelled and blah, blah. And I'd love for the officer to come back and be like, oh, it was loud. And I was speaking sternly, and I knew that this was because one of her complaints was he didn't escort us to this location. And he could be like, oh, well, there were a bunch of other people I needed to tell to get out of their offices and go to the safe location. I couldn't escort you. You were with a bunch of other people. I thought you were safe. I knew you were safe because I'd love to get his side of the story. Are we ever going to hear that officer's side of the story?
Due to the non-specific nature of AOC's story, I think that every kind of Capitol Police officer is kind of looking around going, did you do that? Did I do that? Yeah. So again, there's really no one specific that we could call or that we could reach out to. I myself would be interested in that as well. And in fact, that's a great idea. Maybe that we need to start going after and requesting access to the police officer who spoke sternly to AOC and yelled at her and all the rest of it. I mean, again, the story that exists is that she was hiding and that she was cowering and that she was worried about whether or not she was going to be a parent. And if the evidence supports that, those are legitimate concerns, and we should support her and criticize those that conducted themselves that way.
Sure.
If there isn't, this is fear mongering, and this serves no other purpose other than to drive the country apart further. And incite and potentially incite violence against the right.
Yeah, one of the themes of our show is people make movies in their head. And this is a perfect example. If you love AOC and if you want to believe that was an insurrection, you have that vision you talked about with 50 people, mobs, insurrectionists, and the officers screaming, yelling, blah, blah. Or it could be the officer, you see the video and officer calmly walks down the hall and opens up the door and walks in. We just don't know, but we can know.
And again, the point is that the evidence exists for us to be able to confirm this story. And if it confirmed in the Democrats' favor, they could dunk on the right until 2022, 2024, every minute of every day. But unfortunately, they're not willing to release it, which then leads me to believe that the story is a bunch of hogwash.
Superb. Redstate.com. It's called AOC FOIA Update. And you can go read the whole article and all the documents. Well done, Scott. Thank you, brother.
Thanks so much, man. Have a good day.
That's awesome. That is really, really good stuff. All right, coming up next, we'll talk to Professor Vincent Racaniello. We'll see if he has any good news about when we're going to get out of this COVID mess. He's a pretty optimistic guy, so we'll see what he says next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to go right to our professor. We didn't talk last week because of the trial or whatever the dumb excuse was. I wish we did talk to the professor still. Professor Vincent Racaniello, he's the professor of virology at Columbia University, and you need to listen and watch his podcast, This Week in Virology, and you can do that at microbe.tv. Professor, how are you, sir?
Morning. I'm doing well, thank you.
Really good to talk to you. Let's talk about the latest vaccines. I want to talk about the new vaccines, but the two that we know and love. What are we hearing about their effectiveness, et cetera, et cetera?
So Pfizer and Moderna, those are the ones we have a lot of data on. They're being rolled out in the U.S. and other countries as well. You remember the original efficacy data, over 90%, 94, 95%. That means 94% effective at preventing COVID, including serious and not so serious and mild COVID. So that's great. And this has been rolled out now in Israel in big ways. And the efficacy number is looking similar, 94%. And there's some hints that the vaccine may actually cut down virus shedding. So what is virus shedding? When you get infected, you inhale the virus, it reproduces in your upper tract, and you shed it, of course, and that's how you infect other people. And it looks like the Pfizer vaccine might be reducing shedding a bit. Those are preliminary data out of Israel, which is great news because that means at some point when a lot of people are vaccinated, we'll be able to remove our face masks and go about our normal lives again. So the vaccine news is good.
That's the big thing, right? And that everyone's still worried about is that you could still spread it after the vaccine. So you seem less concerned about that.
As time goes on, I'm less and less concerned. I do think that these vaccines will end up reducing shedding enough so that you don't transmit. And that's really what we want. We want preventing disease, of course. That's the primary goal. But we don't want it to transmit because everyone is not going to get 100% of the population vaccinated, right? We'll be lucky if we get 90%. You want to protect everyone. And that's the key, reducing shedding.
What are these? Last time we talked, you talked about some new vaccines coming down the pipe here. What do we got?
So there are two where the preliminary phase 3 data were released. One is from Johnson & Johnson, and that is an adenovirus vectored vaccine. The spike gene from SARS-CoV-2 is put into an adenovirus. It's very much like the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, different adenovirus though. And the cool thing about that, and that got pretty good efficacy depending on the country, 70s, that is a one-shot vaccine. They've developed that to be one shot, which is really good because a lot of people have trouble getting back for that second shot. So I like that a lot. And that the FDA is going to be looking at those data in a week or two. And then we have another company called Novavax. All right, Novavax is a different vaccine from all the ones we've talked about. This is a protein. It's a spike protein. So unlike the mRNA vaccines where you get, the genetic code for the mRNA injected, or the adenovirus vaccines where the adenovirus carries the spike gene into you, here Novavax has made the protein. They've actually made it in cells in their lab. They purify it, they mix it with an adjuvant, they inject it, and that is also getting up to 90% efficacy as well in the trials. So that is great also. That's going to be a 2-shot vaccine. But we need more. We need more doses by many companies so that we can cover everybody. So that's really great news that these are all doing so well.
Pretty amazing. Like a year ago, we were talking about maybe a vaccine. It could never be invented. And here we are talking about 5 of them. That's remarkable. I understand,
Absolutely.
I think the science, at least I get like an elementary, I think I have a passing grade perhaps in your course, Professor, a C- on how these viruses work. But at least the adenovirus and the mRNA. See, I'd screw up even on that. What is the protein? What is a protein? How does that work? Can you walk me through that?
So when you get the mRNA vaccine, the mRNA is injected into you. It gets into your cells, and then the cells take it and make protein, spike protein in this case, right? And then your immune system recognizes the spike protein, you make antibodies. The Novavax vaccine, you're actually getting the protein injected into. The protein is made in the factories of Novavax, and it's purified and put in the needle, and the protein is actually going into your muscle, not the mRNA. So it doesn't have to be made in, the mRNA does not have to be made into the protein. There's no mRNA. You get the protein, and immediately the immune system says, this is a foreign protein. We have to respond to it. So you cut out a step. You cut out the mRNA to protein step. You put the protein right in.
That sounds better. What's the negative of that, or what's the trade-off?
Better is a tough word to use here because as long as they all prevent COVID, that's what we're looking for. The J&J is a one-shot, which is great. And so far, that's the only one-shot vaccine. The Novavax is a protein. The only issue I would worry about is how long is the immunity going to last, because these protein-based vaccines can last not a long time. They might be short-lived, depends on how they're administered and so forth. That's the only negative I see from that. If it prevents disease, that's great. It's just a question of how long, 3 months, 6 months, a year, and we just have to wait and see that.
All right, I got an ignorant question. If someone injects you with mRNA and your body makes the protein, and versus the company just gives you the protein, are those proteins different in any way, or are they the same? Like, would your body make a different protein than the one that's made in the lab?
Yes, that's a good question. And the answer is it is different. Your body is making the spike. And the way the Novavax protein is made it's not made in human cells. It's actually made in insect cells. Okay. And insect cells are great for making proteins but they make them slightly differently. The spike protein has sugars attached to it. And so the insect cell spike is probably different in these sugars. But in the end, it doesn't matter. All that matters is if it makes antibodies that block infection, and the protein does that as well as the mRNA.
Could each vaccine have different side effects, or are they close enough where the side effects would be the same?
In this case, they're all based on spike. So the spike is going to be associated with certain side effects, and they're going to be the same. If you're having a vector, like an adenovirus vector, that may introduce other side effects or different side effects, because some people may have antibodies to the adenovirus vector, and those could give you a stronger side effect on the boost. I mean, we're just talking about fever, headaches, pain at the injection site, that sort of thing. But they're all pretty similar as far as we can tell so far. If we look at all the safety assessments of these vaccines, the side effects are more or less the same.
I saw a article that delaying the second AstraZeneca dose may be better. Have you seen that? And if that's true, why would that be true? Why would waiting longer result in a better result?
So I did see that, and we talked about it a few weeks ago on This Week in Virology, and it makes perfect sense because, the companies have decided to boost after 3 or 4 weeks, just not for any scientific reason, but just to get this trial done. Otherwise, if you said, well, let's wait 6 months between boosts, then we wouldn't even have a vaccine yet, right? And that makes sense. But the immune response takes longer to develop. And AstraZeneca found that in a certain group of people, they took longer to get back for their second dose, and they actually had better protection. So it makes sense. And of course, in the UK, they're delaying the second dose up to 12 weeks so that they can initially immunize more people. And these results say that that's safe to do, and that's really good. So what's happening is your immune response takes time to develop. It doesn't happen in 3-4 weeks completely. It matures, it gets better and better. So the longer you wait, the better it is.
That's so important to know, because I could see a thinking, and maybe I would think this, that you need to get it within the 3 weeks. Otherwise, your immunity maybe goes down, or the efficacy of the second dose goes down. But now we're saying that it could get better as you wait longer, perhaps.
Yeah, the 3 weeks is not, you don't have to go with 3 weeks later. Absolutely not. This is more of a logistics thing, right? Because, 3 weeks you can remember. Now, if you're talking about a month, 2 months, 6 months, come back in 6 months, you're going to forget. So I think there's a trade-off between waiting longer and remembering to go back.
Okay. Anything on your mind, Professor, that we need to know about that no one's talking about?
Hey, everybody's talking about it all. But what I really like is the fact that the numbers of infections are going down. And why is that, especially in the U.S. here? I think we've had more infections than we know, maybe 4 or 5 times more, because we're not testing everyone. So what's happening is, first of all, more people are being infected and they get immune, and more people are getting vaccinated. So we're starting to see, I think, the beginnings of herd immunity in the U.S. as the case numbers drop. And so what I would say, the drop, probably this is the last drop. I would guess we're not going to have another wave. People are saying differently, but I think this is the end. I think the combination of infections and vaccination are going to end this, and hopefully by the summer we can get back to normal.
Wow, by the summer. I've heard you talk about the fall, perhaps. Do you think summer?
I think in the fall, kids can go back to school and, be in the classroom and all that. But I think in the summer, the cases are going to be negligible and many people will be vaccinated and will really have made a big impact on transmission.
Wow.
That's what I'm thinking
Do you think
these
by
days.
fall we can stop with masks and everything too?
It's likely that we will be able to, unless you're not vaccinated for whatever reason, you should still wear a mask. But if you're vaccinated by the fall, I think enough people are going to be immune so that we could do that,
That's wonderful news. Selfish question. I'm sure there's someone else who has a similar situation. My mom is going to get her second dose on a couple days, maybe this weekend. I forget which one it is. How long until after that do you think it'd be safe for her to get on an airplane and fly across country and see her 1-year-old grandchild?
So since she's older, it's taken her immune system a bit longer, to mature and kick in and so forth. So I would give it a month, and then you can get on the plane. Now, I would wear with your baby, I would wear a mask just to be careful, just to protect the child, right? But yeah, in 4 weeks, go for it.
Beautiful. Professor, appreciate you very much, sir. Wonderful news.
All right. See you next week.
Have a great day. We'll see you on next Monday, microbe.tv for more of the professor. True story. Mike Slater. We'll see you tomorrow. Spread the word.